The heat rose from the asphalt in shimmering waves, distorting the air above the parking lot like a mirage in the desert. It was the kind of Saturday afternoon in Atlanta that made people seek refuge anywhere with air conditioning. And the Galaxy Fun Arcade had become exactly that sanctuary for hundreds of families escaping the brutal summer sun. The temperature had climbed past 95 degrees by 2 in the afternoon, and the sky stretched overhead in an unbroken dome of brilliant blue, not a single cloud offering mercy from the relentless light. Lieutenant Sarah Collins guided her patrol vehicle into the shopping district, her window cracked just enough to let the hot breeze touch her face. Beside her, in the specially designed compartment, K-9 Max sat with his ears perked forward, his intelligent brown eyes scanning the pedestrians moving along the sidewalks. His tongue lolled slightly from the heat, but his posture remained alert, ready as it always was when they were on duty together. Sarah found a parking spot near the entrance of the massive entertainment complex and killed the engine. This was supposed to be a routine community patrol, one of those visibility assignments that the department scheduled on weekends to remind citizens that the Atlanta Police Department was present, watching, caring. She had done hundreds of these over the years, walking through malls and parks and busy streets, letting people see the uniform, letting children pet Max, building the kind of trust that made neighborhoods safer. But today felt different somehow. Sarah could not explain it, could not point to any specific reason for the tension she felt coiling in her stomach as she stepped out of the vehicle and moved to release Max from his compartment. The Belgian Malinois jumped down onto the hot pavement and immediately pressed close to her leg, his nose working the air in quick, rhythmic sniffs. The Galaxy Fun Arcade occupied an entire corner of the Peachtree Commerce Center, its facade decorated with neon signs and cartoon characters that promised endless entertainment within. Even from outside, Sarah could hear the muffled symphony of electronic games, the ping and whistle of machines paying out tickets, the excited shouts of children winning prizes. A steady stream of families moved through the automatic doors, parents carrying diaper bags and pushing strollers, teenagers laughing in groups, young couples holding hands. Sarah adjusted Max's working harness and checked that his leash was properly secured. The harness was black with reflective strips, marked clearly with the words Police K-9, and it transformed Max from a playful companion into something more serious, more focused. He understood the difference. When the harness went on, playtime ended and work began. They approached the entrance together, and the automatic doors slid open to release a blast of cold air that felt almost shocking after the furnace outside. Sarah paused just inside the threshold, letting her eyes adjust to the dimmer interior, taking in the vast space that stretched before her. The arcade was enormous, easily the size of a football field, filled with row after row of gaming machines that blinked and flashed in an endless carnival of light and sound. To her left, a prize counter ran along the entire wall, staffed by 3 teenagers in matching purple polo shirts who exchanged tickets for toys and trinkets. Behind them rose a towering display of prizes, everything from small rubber balls and plastic jewelry at the bottom to enormous stuffed animals and gaming consoles at the top. Children crowded against the counter, counting their tickets, pointing at the prizes they wanted, their faces bright with anticipation. To her right, a food court offered pizza and hot dogs and cotton candy, with families gathered around tables covered in paper plates and spilled drinks. The smell of popcorn and fried food mixed with the slightly metallic scent of the machines, creating an atmosphere that was uniquely arcade, uniquely childhood. Sarah began walking the main aisle, nodding to parents who noticed her uniform, smiling at children who pointed at Max with wide eyes. This was the part of the job she loved most, these quiet moments of connection that reminded her why she had chosen this path. A little girl, maybe 5 years old, tugged on her mother's hand and asked in a loud whisper if she could pet the police dog. Sarah knelt down and invited her over, and Max sat perfectly still, while tiny fingers stroked his ears, his tail wagging gently against the carpet. They continued deeper into the arcade, past racing games and shooting games and dance machines, where teenagers competed for high scores. Sarah kept her pace slow, her eyes moving constantly, watching for anything out of place. 3 days ago, a 9-year-old boy named Lucas Whitfield had disappeared somewhere between his home and his elementary school, a distance of only 4 blocks. The case had consumed the department, with every available officer pulled into the search. But so far they had found nothing. No witnesses, no camera footage, no ransom demand. Lucas had simply vanished, as if the earth had opened up and swallowed him whole. Sarah had not been assigned to the Lucas Whitfield case directly, but like everyone else in the department, she carried the weight of it with her. She had seen the boy's photo 100 times, memorized his face, his sandy brown hair and gap-toothed smile, the Batman backpack he had been carrying when he left for school that morning. His parents had appeared on every news channel, their eyes red from crying, begging anyone with information to come forward. The mother's voice still echoed in Sarah's mind, that raw desperation that no parent should ever have to feel. Max pulled slightly on his leash, and Sarah let him lead her toward the back of the arcade, where the machines grew older and the crowds thinner. This section seemed almost forgotten, populated by vintage games from the 80s and 90s that attracted only the occasional nostalgic adult. The carpet here was more worn, the lighting dimmer, and Sarah noticed that several of the machines displayed out-of-order signs. She was about to turn back toward the busier sections when Max stopped walking. His entire body went rigid, every muscle tensing beneath his short coat. His ears rotated forward like satellite dishes, and his nose lifted to catch something invisible in the recycled air. Sarah felt the change in him instantly, felt the leash grow taut as he strained towards something only he could perceive. This was not curiosity. This was not the casual interest he showed in discarded food or interesting smells. This was the alert, the signal that every K-9 handler learned to recognize and trust above all other evidence. Max had found something. Sarah's heart rate increased, but her training kept her movements calm and controlled. She gave Max more slack on the leash and followed as he pulled her toward the prize counter, moving with purpose through the thinning crowd. People stepped aside as they saw the dog's intensity, parents pulling children out of the way, conversations stopping mid-sentence as the police officer and her K-9 partner moved past. Max led her directly to the prize counter, to a section near the far end where fewer customers gathered. He stopped in front of the display case and scratched at the carpet with his front paw, then lifted his head and let out a single, sharp bark. His eyes fixed on the wall of prizes, on the stuffed animals and plastic toys that hung there in cheerful rows, and he did not move. Sarah studied the area, trying to see what Max saw, trying to understand what had triggered his alert. The counter here looked the same as everywhere else, the same purple-shirted employees, the same cases full of cheap prizes. But Max was never wrong. In 7 years of partnership, he had never once given a false alert. Whatever he had detected, it was real. One of the employees, a young man with acne and nervous eyes, approached from behind the counter. His name tag read Derek, and his smile seemed forced, uncertain. "Can I help you, officer?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly on the last word. Sarah kept her attention on Max while she responded. "My partner seems interested in something back here. Is there anything behind this counter I should know about?" Derek's eyes flicked to the left just for a moment, but Sarah caught it. "Just storage," he said. "Old prizes, broken machines, that kind of stuff. Nothing interesting." Max barked again, louder this time, and began pawing at the base of the counter with increased urgency. Sarah had seen this behavior before, had learned to read its meaning over years of working together. Max was telling her that what he sought was close, very close, and that it mattered. "I need to see that storage area," Sarah said. It was not a request. Derek's face paled. "I would have to ask my manager," he stammered. "I do not think we can just let people back there." Sarah met his eyes and held them. "I am not asking permission. Get your manager now." The young man practically ran toward the back of the arcade, disappearing through a door marked "Employees Only." Sarah used the moment to examine the prize counter more closely, running her eyes along the seams where the display case met the wall. Something was wrong here. She could feel it in the same way she had felt the tension earlier, that instinct that every good cop developed over years of reading situations and people. Max whined softly and pressed his nose against the bottom of the display case, against a section where the prizes hung especially thick, blocking the view of whatever lay behind them. Sarah crouched down beside him and looked more closely. The carpet here was slightly discolored, worn in a pattern that suggested frequent passage, and the edge of the display case did not quite meet the floor the way it should have. A man emerged from the employee's door, moving quickly toward them. He was older than Derek, maybe 50, with thinning grey hair and a belly that strained against his Galaxy Fun arcade manager shirt. His name tag identified him as Ronald Vickers, and his expression mixed annoyance with something else, something that looked almost like fear. "Officer," he said, spreading his hands in a gesture of helpless confusion. "I am Ronald Vickers, the general manager. Derek tells me there is some kind of problem." Sarah stood and faced him directly. "My K-9 partner has alerted to something in this area. I need access to whatever is behind this counter." Vickers shook his head. "That is just our storage room, officer. Old equipment, extra prizes, nothing of interest to the police. I am sure your dog just smells the food from the snack bar or something." Max growled, a low, rumbling sound that Sarah had rarely heard from him. His hackles rose along his spine, and his eyes fixed on Vickers with an intensity that made the manager take a step backward. Sarah felt the pieces clicking together in her mind, felt the pattern emerging from the chaos of sensory information, the nervous employee, the hidden storage, the manager's desperate attempt to redirect her attention, and Max, whose instinct she trusted more than any human witness, telling her with every fiber of his being that something was very wrong here. She unclipped her radio from her belt and called dispatch. "This is Lieutenant Collins, requesting backup at Galaxy Fun Arcade, Peachtree Commerce Center. I have a K-9 alert and possible concealment situation. Send 2 units and notify Detective Branch that we may have something related to the Whitfield case." Vickers's face went white. "Now wait just a minute," he said, his voice rising. "You cannot just call in the cavalry because a dog sniffed something. I know my rights. You need a warrant to search my property." "Your dog is alerting to something in a public business?" Sarah replied evenly. "That gives me probable cause for a protective sweep. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to worry about." But Vickers did not look like a man with nothing to hide. He looked like a man whose world was crumbling around him, whose carefully constructed facade was cracking under pressure he had never expected to face. His eyes darted toward the employee's door, calculating, desperate. "Do not even think about it," Sarah warned. "Whatever is back there, whatever you are hiding, running will only make it worse." The next few minutes stretched into an eternity. Sarah kept her position by the prize counter, one hand resting on her service weapon, the other holding Max's leash as he continued to alert. Vickers stood frozen, caught between fight and flight, his breath coming in short gasps. Derek and the other employees huddled near the food court, watching with wide eyes as their ordinary Saturday afternoon transformed into something none of them could have anticipated. The backup units arrived quickly, 2 patrol cars disgorging 4 officers who moved through the arcade with professional efficiency. The crowd parted to let them pass, parents gathering their children, teenagers filming with their phones, everyone sensing that something significant was unfolding before them. Sarah briefed the arriving officers quickly, explaining Max's alert and Vickers's suspicious behavior. One of them, a veteran named Patterson, whom Sarah had worked with for years, took charge of securing the manager while Sarah and the others prepared to investigate the storage area. "I want to show you something," Sarah said to Patterson, gesturing toward the base of the display case. "Look at this carpet. See how it is worn differently here. And this edge does not match the rest of the counter." Patterson crouched down and examined the area. "You think there is something hidden behind this thing? Only one way to find out." They cleared the employees and remaining customers from the immediate area, establishing a perimeter that gave them room to work. Sarah positioned Max beside her and reached for the edge of the display case, feeling along the seam for any kind of release mechanism. Her fingers found a small depression, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it. She pressed, and something clicked, and the entire section of the display case swung outward on hidden hinges, revealing a dark opening in the wall behind it. The smell hit her first, a mixture of stale air and something else, something human. Max lunged forward, straining against his leash, and Sarah had to use all her strength to hold him back. "Easy, boy," she whispered. "We go together, slow and careful." She drew her flashlight and shone it into the darkness. The beam revealed a narrow passage, maybe 3 feet wide, with rough concrete walls and a floor covered in thin industrial carpet. The passage extended beyond the range of her light, sloping gently downward into the earth. Patterson whistled softly. "What in the world is this place?" "I do not know yet," Sarah replied, "but we are about to find out." She keyed her radio again. "Dispatch, this is Collins. We have discovered a hidden passage behind the prize counter at Galaxy Fun Arcade. Requesting additional units and possibly rescue personnel. Unknown what we are dealing with down here." The response crackled back immediately, confirming that more help was on the way. But Sarah could not wait. Max was pulling her forward with an urgency she had never seen from him before, his whines taking on an almost frantic quality. Whatever was down there, whoever was down there, they needed help now. "I am going in," she announced. "Patterson, secure the entrance and do not let anyone follow unless I call for backup." Patterson looked like he wanted to argue, but he knew better. Sarah was the ranking officer, and more importantly, she was the one with the K-9 partner who had led them here. If anyone was going to navigate that dark passage, it had to be her. Sarah released the tension on Max's leash and let him lead her into the darkness. The passage was tight, forcing her to walk slightly hunched, and the walls pressed close on either side. Her flashlight created a cone of illumination that seemed pathetically small against the surrounding black, but Max moved forward without hesitation, his nose guiding them deeper underground. The passage turned twice, left and then right, before opening into a wider space. Sarah's flashlight swept across what appeared to be a storage room of some kind, filled with old arcade cabinets and broken equipment. But Max did not stop here. He pulled her toward another door at the far end of the room, a heavy steel door that looked far more substantial than anything else in this forgotten space. Sarah tried the handle. Locked. She examined the mechanism, found a simple deadbolt that could be opened from the outside. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she reached for it, as she prepared to discover what lay beyond. The deadbolt slid back with a metallic clunk. The door swung inward. And Sarah Collins found herself staring at something that would haunt her dreams for years to come. The room beyond was larger than she expected, maybe 20 feet square, with concrete walls painted a faded yellow and fluorescent lights humming overhead. It was furnished like a strange parody of a children's playroom, with bunk beds along one wall and a television in the corner and shelves filled with toys and books. And sitting on those bunk beds, staring at her with wide eyes that held equal measures of fear and hope, were 5 children. Sarah recognized the face of Lucas Whitfield immediately. He sat on the bottom bunk nearest the door, clutching a stuffed dinosaur to his chest. His sandy brown hair longer and dirtier than in the photos, but unmistakably him. Beside him sat a girl of maybe 11 with dark braids, and above them 2 younger boys who could not have been more than 6 or 7. On the far bunk, a teenage girl with hollow cheeks watched Sarah with suspicious eyes. "It is okay," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "I'm a police officer. I am here to help you." Max pushed past her into the room, his earlier urgency transforming into something gentler. He approached Lucas slowly, his tail wagging low, and pressed his nose against the boy's knee. Lucas reached out with trembling fingers and touched the dog's head, and something in his face cracked open, something that had been held tightly closed for 3 days, of fear and uncertainty. "You found me," Lucas whispered. "The police dog found me." Sarah moved into the room, checking corners, ensuring no threats remained hidden. The space was clean but sparse, the bunk beds made with military precision, the toys arranged neatly on shelves. A small bathroom opened off one corner, and a mini refrigerator hummed beside a table stacked with juice boxes and packaged snacks. Whoever had created this place had intended for children to survive here, perhaps even to be comfortable in some twisted way. She keyed her radio with hands that wanted to shake. "Dispatch, we have found Lucas Whitfield. Repeat, we have found Lucas Whitfield alive. Also 4 additional children of various ages, requesting medical personnel and child protective services immediately. We need the whole cavalry down here." The response was chaos, voices overlapping as the news spread through the department. Sarah heard Patterson shouting from somewhere above, heard the sound of additional officers arriving, heard the first hints of sirens in the distance. But in this underground room, time seemed to move differently, each second stretching into minutes as she took in the magnitude of what they had discovered. She approached the teenage girl on the far bunk, moving slowly, hands visible. "What is your name, sweetheart?" The girl's eyes remained wary. "Emma," she said finally. "Emma Castellano. I have been here for 2 years. 2 years." Sarah felt the words like a physical blow. 2 years this child had lived in an underground room beneath an arcade, hidden from a world that had surely been searching for her. She reached for Emma's hand and held it gently. "You are safe now," Sarah said. "All of you are safe. No one is going to hurt you anymore." The next hours blurred into a whirlwind of activity that Sarah would later struggle to piece together in proper sequence. Paramedics arrived and examined each child, finding them physically unharmed, but suffering from various degrees of malnutrition and psychological trauma. Child Protective Services coordinated with families who had spent months or years believing their children were gone forever. The FBI took over the investigation, their agents swarming the arcade and the underground complex with the focused intensity of professionals confronting something truly evil. Sarah stayed with the children as long as she could, answering their questions, offering comfort, keeping Max close because his presence seemed to calm them in ways that human contact could not. Lucas clung to the dog like a lifeline, his fingers buried in Max's fur, and Sarah did not have the heart to separate them, even when the paramedics tried to insist. Ronald Vickers was arrested within minutes of the children's discovery. His rights read as officers handcuffed him beside the prize counter he had used to hide his crimes. He said nothing during the arrest, his face a mask of empty resignation, but his silence would not protect him from what was coming. The evidence in that underground room would speak loudly enough for everyone. The story emerged over the following days, pieced together from interviews and forensic evidence and Vickers's eventual confession. The hidden passage had been built years ago, originally intended as an emergency exit from the basement storage. But Vickers had seen other possibilities in that forgotten space, had converted it into something monstrous over months of secret construction. He had been taking children for nearly 3 years, choosing his victims carefully, learning their routines, waiting for the perfect moment to make them disappear. He had not hurt them, not physically, and the psychological evaluations would later reveal that he had treated them with a bizarre combination of control and care. He had fed them, clothed them, even educated them with books and videos. He had convinced himself that he was saving them, protecting them from a world he believed was too dangerous for children to navigate alone. His delusion was complete, his mental illness profound. But none of that would matter in court. What mattered was that 5 children had been stolen from their families, hidden beneath the earth like treasures in some dragon's hoard, and only the nose of a Belgian Malinois had finally set them free. Sarah attended Lucas Whitfield's reunion with his parents, standing at the edge of the hospital room, as mother and father embraced the son they had feared they would never see again. The sound of their crying filled the space, raw and healing and impossibly beautiful. And Sarah found herself crying too, her professional composure finally crumbling under the weight of what she had helped accomplish. Max sat beside her, his head resting against her leg, and she stroked his ears with fingers that still trembled slightly. "Good boy," she whispered. "You did so good." 3 days later, Sarah received a summons to the chief's office. She went expecting paperwork, debriefs, the bureaucratic aftermath that always followed major cases. What she found instead was a room full of people, officers and detectives and administrators who broke into applause when she walked through the door. The chief, a stocky woman with steel-grey hair and a reputation for being tough but fair, stepped forward and shook Sarah's hand. "Lieutenant Collins," she said, her voice carrying over the noise, "on behalf of the Atlanta Police Department and the families of 5 recovered children, I want to thank you for your extraordinary service." Sarah felt her face flush. "It was Max, Chief. He is the one who found them." The chief smiled. "And that is why we have something special for him too." She produced 2 small boxes from her desk, opening them to reveal medals gleaming against velvet backgrounds. "For you, the Medal of Valor, and for K-9 Max, the Award for Meritorious Service." The room erupted in fresh applause as the chief pinned the medal to Sarah's uniform and attached a matching citation to Max's harness. Sarah looked down at her partner, at the dog who had led her through darkness into light, who had used gifts no human possessed to find children no human could find, and she felt a love so profound it almost hurt to contain it. After the ceremony, after the handshakes and photographs and congratulations, Sarah slipped away to the quiet corner of the building where the K-9 unit kept their vehicles. She sat on the tailgate of her patrol car with Max beside her, watching the sun set over Atlanta in streaks of orange and gold. "You know what I was thinking about today?" she said to him, scratching behind his ears the way he liked. "I was thinking about all those families who will get to be together tonight. Lucas and his parents, Emma and her mom, all those kids who get to sleep in their own beds, in their own homes because you would not give up." Max turned his head and licked her cheek, his tail thumping against the metal tailgate. Sarah laughed and pulled him close. "Yeah, you are pretty pleased with yourself, are you not? You should be. You are the best partner anyone could ask for." They sat there together until the last light faded from the sky, woman and dog, partners in something larger than either of them could fully understand. Somewhere in the city, children were being held by parents who had learned to appreciate miracles. Somewhere, a monster was facing justice for crimes he had thought he would never answer for. And here, in the quiet of the evening, Sarah Collins and K-9 Max shared a moment of peace that they had earned through courage, instinct, and a bond that nothing could break. The weeks that followed brought a flood of media attention that Sarah found uncomfortable, and Max seemed to find bewildering. Reporters camped outside the K-9 unit headquarters, requesting interviews, wanting photographs, trying to capture the story of the hero dog and his handler, who had saved 5 children from an underground prison. Sarah declined most of the requests, preferring to let the facts speak for themselves, but she could not escape the reality that their lives had changed in ways she was still learning to understand. Fan mail arrived by the bagful, letters from children and adults across the country who had followed the story and wanted to express their gratitude. Many included drawings of Max, crayon renderings of a brave police dog with ears perked and tail high, and Sarah pinned the best of these to the bulletin board in her office. A GoFundMe campaign raised over $200,000 for the victims' families before Sarah even knew it existed. The mayor declared a K-9 Appreciation Day in Atlanta and invited Sarah and Max to lead the parade. But the attention that meant the most came from the children themselves. Lucas Whitfield sent a video message filmed on his mother's phone, his face bright and healthy, his words tumbling over each other in excited gratitude. He showed Max the stuffed dinosaur he had been holding when they found him, explained that he had named it Max Jr., announced that he wanted to be a police dog handler when he grew up. Sarah watched the video 17 times and cried every single time. Emma Castellano wrote a letter in careful cursive, describing her first day back at school, her first meal at her family's dinner table, her first night sleeping without fear that someone would come to check on her through a locked door. She wrote that she had started volunteering at an animal shelter because being around dogs made her feel safe, made her think of Max and the moment when everything changed. She wrote that she was going to be okay, that they were all going to be okay, and Sarah believed her. The other children found their own ways to heal, supported by families who had never stopped searching and a community that rallied around them with unprecedented generosity. Therapists and counselors worked with each child individually, helping them process their experiences and rebuild their sense of safety. The prognosis was good, the experts said. Children were resilient, and these children had each other, had shared an experience that bonded them in ways that would last lifetimes. Sarah threw herself back into work with renewed purpose, taking Max on patrols that felt different now, charged with new meaning. Every shift became an opportunity, every corner a potential discovery, every alert from Max a possible pathway to someone who needed help. She found herself paying closer attention to the overlooked spaces, the forgotten corners, the places where people in trouble might hide or be hidden. One morning, about 6 weeks after the arcade rescue, Sarah arrived at headquarters to find a request from the FBI waiting on her desk. They wanted her to consult on a series of child disappearance cases in 3 different states, cases that showed patterns similar to what Vickers had done in Atlanta. They wanted Max, too, his nose and his instincts added to the federal toolkit for finding missing children. Sarah read the request twice, then looked down at Max, who lay sprawled on his bed in the corner of her office, legs twitching as he dreamed of rabbits or suspects or whatever it was that police dogs dreamed about. "What do you think, partner?" she asked. "You ready for the big leagues?" Max opened one eye, regarded her with what she interpreted as casual agreement, then closed it again and resumed his nap. Sarah laughed and reached for her phone. She had calls to make, arrangements to consider, a career trajectory that was suddenly pointing in directions she had never anticipated. But first, she had a patrol to run, a city to protect, a partnership to honor through action rather than words. She clipped Max's working harness into place and watched him transform, his posture straightening, his eyes sharpening, his whole being orienting toward the work that gave his life meaning. They walked out together into a morning bright with possibility, woman and dog, ready for whatever the world might bring them next. The Galaxy Fun Arcade had closed permanently, its doors shuttered, its neon signs dark. The building stood empty now, a monument to secrets exposed and justice served, and Sarah drove past it sometimes on her patrols, just to remember. The hidden passage had been sealed with concrete, the underground room filled in and buried. But the memory of what had happened there would never be erased. She thought about Vickers sometimes, about the twisted logic that had led him to believe he was helping children by stealing them from their lives. His trial was scheduled for the following spring, and prosecutors were confident of a conviction that would keep him locked away forever. But Sarah knew that no punishment could truly address what he had done, could give back the years that Emma had lost, or erase the nightmares that still haunted Lucas. Justice was necessary, but it was also insufficient. All anyone could do was move forward, healing what could be healed, protecting what could be protected. Max led her on patrol through the downtown streets, past office buildings and restaurants and parks where families gathered to enjoy the warm weather. They stopped to visit an elementary school where the children surrounded Max with delighted squeals, petting him and hugging him and telling him he was the bravest dog in the whole world. One little boy, maybe 7 years old, looked up at Sarah with serious eyes and asked if Max ever got scared. Sarah crouched down to meet his gaze. "Everyone gets scared sometimes," she said, "but being brave does not mean you are not scared. It means you do the right thing, even when you are scared." The boy considered this wisdom carefully, then nodded with the gravity of a philosopher reaching an important conclusion. "I want to be brave like Max," he declared. "You will be," Sarah promised. "You already are." They continued their patrol through the afternoon, stopping to assist a lost tourist, helping direct traffic around a minor fender bender, checking on a homeless man who had found shelter in an alley behind a restaurant. These small acts of service formed the fabric of their days, the ordinary work that kept communities safe and connected. Not every shift brought a miraculous rescue or a dramatic confrontation with evil. Most shifts were quiet, routine, almost mundane. But Sarah had learned to value these moments as much as the extraordinary ones, to recognize that the patient accumulation of small kindnesses mattered as much as any single heroic act. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon when Sarah's radio crackled with a call she had been dreading. Dispatch reported a child missing from a playground in the Midtown district, a 4-year-old girl who had wandered away from her mother's sight and had not been seen for 20 minutes. Units were responding, but the area was crowded, confusing, full of places where a small child might hide or become trapped. Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline and concern. She was close, maybe 5 minutes from the scene. "Responding," she said into the radio. "K-9 unit en route." She drove quickly but carefully, navigating traffic with the ease of long practice. Beside her, Max seemed to sense the urgency, his body tense and alert, his nose already working the air that flowed through the cracked window. He knew the difference between routine patrols and real emergencies, and he was ready. The playground occupied a corner of Piedmont Park, a green space crowded with families on this perfect summer evening. Sarah spotted the cluster of officers immediately, gathered near a woman who sat on a bench with her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Other parents stood nearby, their faces tight with sympathetic fear, their children pulled close against legs and held firmly by hands. Sarah approached and introduced herself quickly, then knelt beside the crying mother. "Ma'am, I am Lieutenant Collins, and this is K-9 Max. Can you tell me about your daughter? What was she wearing? Do you have anything with her scent on it?" The woman looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "Her name is Lily. She is wearing a yellow dress with sunflowers on it. She has blonde hair in pigtails. She was playing right there." She pointed toward a sandbox near the edge of the playground. I looked away for 1 second, just 1 second, and she was gone. Sarah kept her voice calm and reassuring. "That is very helpful. Do you have anything that belongs to Lily? A toy she was playing with or a piece of clothing?" The woman reached into her bag with trembling hands and produced a small stuffed rabbit, its fur worn thin from years of love. "This is Mr. Buttons. She takes him everywhere. She must have dropped him when she—" Sarah took the rabbit gently and held it out for Max to smell. He sniffed it thoroughly, his nostrils flaring, his brain cataloguing the unique combination of scents that made up Lily's olfactory signature. Then he looked up at Sarah with an expression she had come to know well, an expression that said he was ready. "Find!" Sarah commanded. "Find Lily!" Max put his nose to the ground and began to work, moving in expanding circles around the sandbox where Lily had last been seen. His pace was deliberate, methodical, his training guiding him through a systematic search pattern. Sarah followed with his leash held loosely, trusting his instincts, watching for the signs that would tell her when he caught the trail. It did not take long. Within 2 minutes, Max's head came up sharply, and he oriented toward the north edge of the park, where a line of dense bushes separated the green space from a walking path. He pulled forward with sudden urgency, and Sarah called out to the other officers as she followed. "He has something, this way." They moved quickly through the bushes, emerging onto a paved path that wound through a more wooded section of the park. Max never hesitated, never doubted, his nose leading them past benches and trash cans, and startled joggers who stepped aside at the sight of the police dog in full pursuit. The path curved around a small pond, its surface dotted with ducks and the occasional turtle. Max slowed as they rounded the bend, his head swinging left and right, recalibrating his search. Then he found the scent again and surged forward, pulling Sarah toward a dense thicket of azalea bushes that grew along the water's edge. Sarah's heart clenched with fear as they approached the pond. A 4-year-old child, alone, near water. The scenarios that ran through her mind were terrifying, but Max did not lead her toward the water. Instead, he stopped at the base of the largest azalea bush and began to whine, his tail wagging with unmistakable excitement. Sarah crouched down and peered into the dense foliage. There, curled up in a small hollow at the base of the bush, her yellow sundress dirty and her pigtails coming undone, sat Lily. She was crying softly, her thumb in her mouth, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. "Hi there, Lily," Sarah said gently. "I found you. Your mommy is looking for you and she sent me to bring you home." The little girl stared at her for a long moment, then noticed Max sitting patiently beside Sarah. She pointed with a chubby finger. "Doggy." "That is right," Sarah smiled. "This is Max. He is a very special dog. He helped me find you." Lily seemed to consider this information, then reached out toward Max with both arms. "Doggy," she repeated more insistently this time. Sarah helped the child out of her hiding spot and set her on the grass beside Max. The dog, understanding his role, lay down and allowed Lily to wrap her arms around his neck, to bury her face in his fur, to find comfort in his steady, patient presence. Sarah used her radio to report the successful recovery, and within minutes, the sound of running footsteps announced the mother's arrival. The reunion was everything Sarah had hoped it would be. The mother swept Lily into her arms with a cry of pure relief, holding her so tightly that the little girl squirmed in protest. "Thank you," the woman gasped, looking at Sarah with tears streaming down her face. "Thank you so much. Thank Max," Sarah said. "He is the one who found her." The mother looked down at the Belgian Malinois, who sat watching the scene with his head tilted slightly to one side. Then she reached out and stroked his ears with a hand that still shook from the aftermath of fear. "Thank you, Max," she whispered. "Thank you for bringing my baby back to me." Max's tail wagged once, a modest acknowledgement of a job well done. The walk back through the park felt different than the urgent search that had preceded it. Lily rode on her mother's hip, one hand clutching Mr. Buttons, the other reaching down occasionally to touch Max's head as he walked beside them. The other officers had dispersed. The emergency resolved, the ordinary peace of a summer evening restored. But Sarah knew that for this mother, nothing would ever feel quite ordinary again. She had faced every parent's worst nightmare and emerged on the other side, her child safe, her faith in the world battered but intact. They reached the playground where the search had begun, and Sarah prepared to say goodbye, to return to her patrol and leave this small family to begin the process of recovering from their scare. But Lily had other ideas. She squirmed in her mother's arms until she was set down on the ground, then toddled over to Max and planted a kiss directly on his nose. "Love you, doggy," she announced. Max's ears went back slightly in surprise, but his tail wagged furiously. Sarah laughed and crouched down beside the little girl. "Max loves you too," she said, "and he is very glad you are safe." Lily nodded seriously, as if this was exactly what she had expected to hear, then allowed her mother to pick her up again. They said their goodbyes, exchanged information in case there were follow-up questions, and then Sarah and Max were alone again, partners in the fading light of a day that had offered them another chance to make a difference. "Not a bad shift," Sarah said to Max as they walked back toward her vehicle. "2 rescues in 6 weeks. You are on a roll." Max looked up at her with an expression that might have been pride, or might have been hunger, or might have been nothing more than a dog's natural attention to his human companion. Sarah chose to interpret it as pride. They drove home through streets that glowed orange in the sunset, past houses where families were sitting down to dinner, past parks where children played their final games before being called inside. Atlanta spread around them in all its complicated beauty, a city of millions of stories, millions of lives, millions of moments of joy and sorrow, and everything in between. Sarah and Max occupied their own small corner of that vast human tapestry, doing their part to keep the peace, to protect the vulnerable, to bring the lost safely home. Sarah's apartment felt quiet after the intensity of the day. She fed Max his dinner and watched him eat with the focused determination he brought to everything, then prepared her own simple meal and sat on the couch to decompress. The television played news coverage of the Lucas Whitfield case, talking heads analyzing the psychological profile of Ronald Vickers, experts debating how such crimes could be prevented in the future. Sarah watched for a few minutes, then turned it off. She did not need analysis or debate. She needed rest, recovery, preparation for whatever tomorrow might bring. Max finished his dinner and padded over to join her on the couch, settling his head in her lap with a contented sigh. Sarah stroked his fur absently, her mind wandering through the events of recent weeks, through the arcade and the underground room and the children's faces when they first saw light. She thought about Emma Castellano, locked away for 2 years, missing the entirety of her middle school experience, forced to grow up in ways no child should have to grow. She thought about Lucas Whitfield, only 3 days in captivity but already marked by the experience, already changed in ways that would take years to fully understand. She thought about Lily in the park, lost for barely 20 minutes but terrified nonetheless. The world suddenly revealed as a place where children could vanish without warning. And she thought about Max, about the gift of his nose and his instincts and his unwavering partnership. He could not understand the larger implications of what he did, could not appreciate the full scope of the suffering he helped prevent. He simply followed his training, did his job, trusted his handler to put him in positions where his abilities could make a difference. But that simple service, that faithful execution of his purpose, had changed lives in ways that rippled outward like waves from a stone dropped in still water. "You are a good boy," Sarah said softly, scratching behind his ears. "The best boy there ever was." Max's tail thumped against the couch cushion, his eyes half closed in contentment. He did not need praise or medals or public recognition. He needed this, the quiet moments with his person, the safety of home, the simple pleasures of a full belly. and a soft place to rest. They sat together as night fell over Atlanta, the city lights coming on one by one until the darkness was held at bay by a million points of illumination. Somewhere out there, Lucas Whitfield was sleeping in his own bed for the first time in weeks. Somewhere, Emma Castellano was dreaming of a future that had seemed impossible just days ago. Somewhere, Lily was clutching Mr. Buttons and telling her father about the nice doggy who had found her in the bushes. And here, in this modest apartment on a quiet street, Lieutenant Sarah Collins and K-9 Max rested together, partners in peace as they had been partners in action, ready for whatever the next day might demand of them. The night deepened, and Sarah eventually carried Max to his bed in the corner of her bedroom, settling him on the soft foam mattress that cradled his aging joints. He was 7 years old now, well past the midpoint of a working dog's career, and she sometimes worried about the future, about the day when he would be too old for field work, when she would have to say goodbye to the partnership that had defined her professional life. But that day was not today, and she had learned not to borrow trouble from the future. She climbed into her own bed and lay in the darkness, listening to Max's steady breathing, feeling the day's tension slowly drain from her muscles. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to make a difference. But tonight, she allowed herself to simply be grateful. Grateful for the path that had led her here, grateful for the dog who shared her journey, grateful for the privilege of doing work that mattered. Sleep came slowly, but when it arrived, it brought no dreams, only deep and restorative rest. And when her alarm went off at 5 the next morning, Sarah rose with renewed energy, ready to face whatever the world had waiting for her. She and Max ran their usual morning route through the neighborhood, a 3-mile loop that kept them both in the shape their work demanded. The dawn air was cool and fresh, carrying scents that made Max's nose twitch with interest, and Sarah let him investigate a few particularly intriguing bushes before calling him back to pace beside her. At the K-9 unit headquarters, she briefed with the other handlers about the day's assignments. There was a community event at a local elementary school that afternoon, an opportunity to show children how police dogs worked and to answer questions about law enforcement careers. Sarah signed up immediately. After everything that had happened recently, she wanted to spend time with kids who were safe and happy, who viewed police dogs as exciting rather than as last hopes for rescue. The morning patrol was quiet, routine, the kind of shift that reminded Sarah why she loved this work even on its most mundane days. She and Max walked through shopping districts and residential neighborhoods, chatted with shop owners and nodded to joggers, maintained the visible presence that deterred crime simply by existing. It was not glamorous work, but it was essential, the foundation upon which everything else was built. At noon, she stopped for lunch at a small cafe that welcomed police officers with discounts and warm smiles. She sat at an outdoor table with Max lying at her feet, enjoying a sandwich and a glass of iced tea, while the city moved around her in its endless rhythms. A teenager at a nearby table worked on homework, his textbooks spread across the surface. An elderly couple shared a piece of cake, their hands intertwined across the table. A mother negotiated with a toddler who wanted ice cream instead of vegetables. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, protected by a system that worked mostly invisibly to keep them safe. Sarah finished her lunch and gathered Max for the drive to the elementary school. The community event was scheduled for 2 o'clock, and she wanted to arrive early to set up and prepare. Max seemed to sense that something different was happening today, his demeanor shifting from working alertness to something more relaxed and playful. He knew the difference between real operations and public relations, and he approached each with appropriate energy. The school gymnasium was already filling with excited children when Sarah and Max walked through the doors. Banners welcomed the police department, and teachers worked to maintain some semblance of order among students who were practically vibrating with anticipation. Sarah had done dozens of these events over the years, but they never got old. Seeing children's faces light up at the sight of Max was its own kind of reward. She set up at a table near the front of the gym, laying out brochures about the K-9 unit and preparing a few demonstration tools she would use during the presentation. Max sat beside her, accepting the attention of passing children with patient dignity, allowing himself to be petted and photographed and generally adored. The presentation began with an overview of how police dogs were trained, what kinds of work they did, and why they were such valuable members of law enforcement teams. Sarah kept her language simple and her energy high, engaging the children with questions and demonstrations that made the information memorable. She showed them how Max responded to basic commands, how he could find hidden objects using his nose, how his harness transformed him from a friendly pet into a focused professional. Then came the question and answer session, always Sarah's favorite part. Children raised their hands with an eagerness that made her smile, their queries ranging from the practical to the bizarre. "Does Max have a favorite toy?" "Yes," Sarah laughed. "He loves tennis balls more than anything in the world. Does he get scared of thunderstorms?" "Actually, no. He is pretty brave about loud noises. Part of his training teaches him to stay calm, even when things are scary. Does he arrest people? Not exactly. He helps us find people who are hiding or who are lost, and sometimes he helps us find things that people have hidden. But the arresting part is my job, not his." A small hand shot up near the back of the gym. Sarah pointed to a girl with curly red hair and glasses that seemed too big for her face. "How did Max find those kids who were missing?" Sarah felt the room grow quieter, felt the teachers exchanging glances as they wondered how she would handle this question. The Lucas Whitfield case had been all over the news, and even elementary school children were aware of what had happened. She considered her words carefully before responding. "Max has a very special nose that can smell things humans cannot smell at all. When a person is missing, we give Max something that belongs to that person, something that has their unique smell on it. Then Max uses his nose like a detective, following that smell wherever it leads, even if it goes to places we would never think to look." She paused, making sure the children were following. "In the case you are talking about, Max followed the smell through a very big building until he found a hidden door that nobody knew was there. And behind that door, we found the children who had been missing. They were safe, and we brought them back to their families." The girl with the glasses nodded thoughtfully. "So Max is like a superhero?" Sarah smiled. "Yes, I think you could say that. He is definitely my superhero." A boy near the front raised his hand. "Can I hug Max?" Sarah looked down at her partner, who was watching the crowd with an expression of tolerant patience. "I think Max would like that very much," she said. "But let us do it one at a time so everyone gets a chance." What followed was an orderly procession of children approaching Max for hugs, pets, and photos. He bore the attention with remarkable grace, his tail wagging steadily, his demeanor gentle and welcoming. Sarah watched with pride as he connected with child after child, building the positive associations that would shape how these young people viewed law enforcement for years to come. When the event finally concluded, Sarah was tired but satisfied. She loaded Max into the patrol vehicle and sat for a moment in the driver's seat, collecting herself before starting the afternoon patrol. The sun was warm through the windshield, and Max had already settled into his traveling position, his chin resting on his paws. "Good job in there," Sarah told him. "You are a natural with kids." Max's ear twitched, acknowledging her words without fully waking from his rest. They drove through the afternoon streets in comfortable silence, the kind of quiet that comes from years of partnership, from knowing each other so well that words are often unnecessary. Sarah thought about the questions the children had asked, about the way they had looked at Max with wonder and admiration. She hoped that some of those children would grow up to serve their communities, whether as police officers or firefighters or teachers or doctors. She hoped that today had planted seeds that would blossom in ways she would never see, but could trust were real. The radio interrupted her thoughts with a routine call, a noise complaint in a residential area that was probably nothing but still required investigation. Sarah responded and drove to the address, finding an ordinary house on an ordinary street with no obvious signs of disturbance. She knocked on the door and spoke with an elderly man who apologized profusely for the false alarm. His television had been too loud again, he explained, and his hearing was not what it used to be. Sarah assured him it was no trouble, reminded him gently to check his volume settings, and returned to her vehicle with the vague sense of anticlimax that often followed such calls. The rest of the afternoon passed without incident. Sarah drove through neighborhoods and shopping districts, keeping her eyes open and her instincts alert, letting Max's nose sample the air for anything that might require their attention. But the city seemed peaceful today, content to move through its ordinary rhythms without requiring intervention. As the sun began to set, Sarah turned toward home, her shift officially over. She stopped at a pet store to pick up a new bag of Max's preferred food, then at a grocery store for her own dinner supplies. Max waited in the vehicle during these errands, watching passers-by through the window with the casual vigilance that never quite left him. At home, Sarah followed her usual routine. Feed Max, prepare her own meal, review any paperwork that had accumulated during the day. She had reports to file about the community event, evaluations to complete for Max's training records, emails to answer from families who wanted to thank her, and from media outlets still requesting interviews. She worked through the administrative tasks with the same focus she brought to fieldwork, understanding that both kinds of effort were necessary to keep the system functioning. The paperwork might be less exciting than rescues and arrests, but it documented what they did, justified their resources, and helped the department learn and improve. By 9 o'clock, Sarah was ready for rest. She took Max outside for his final walk of the evening, letting him explore the small yard that came with her apartment, while she watched the stars appear overhead. The night was clear and cool, a perfect end to a day that had reminded her why she loved her work. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to make a difference. But tonight, Sarah allowed herself to simply be present, to appreciate the peace she had helped create, to cherish the partnership that made everything possible. She called Max back inside and locked the door behind them, leaving the world's troubles on the other side. Whatever came next, they would face it together, as they had faced everything since the day they first met. That was what partnership meant. That was what made them who they were. And in the quiet of the evening, in the safety of home, Lieutenant Sarah Collins and K-9 Max found rest, knowing that their work mattered, that lives had been changed, that somewhere in the city, children slept peacefully because a dog had followed his nose into darkness and emerged carrying light.